Hello, my name is Lorcan Dempsey. I'm here in a meeting room in OCLC. Ambel asked would we video a presentation. I said yes. So I'm going to talk about reconfiguring library boundaries without an audience, without a screen. So the experience will be as unnatural for me as it will be for you in the audience. So what I'm going to do is do a shorter version of a presentation I gave to the RLUK Deputy Directors meeting associated with the RLUK meeting a little while back. And really it's about thinking about the library in the network environment as things change, but not sort of technologies or services, but the way in which the library organizes its services and the way in which the library relates to other services as we move forward. So I'm going to say a little bit at the beginning about scale and about boundaries of the library. So if we think about pressures that the library is currently operating under, I have a picture here of the proportion of university spend that goes on libraries in North America. Now, while the overall spend on libraries may be growing slightly or may be steady, the actual proportion of educational spend that goes on libraries is declining. So that means there are more requirements, education is getting bigger, but the proportion of library spend is declining slightly. Now, I understand that the picture may be slightly different in the UK. David Prosser, when I spoke at RLUK, suggested that the RLUK picture would be different and it wouldn't show that decline. Nevertheless, we're all aware that libraries are needing to make more serious choices about their resources and where they are expended, given the overall financial situation. The other big change is the network. Many information services on the network. The network changes the way we do things. It's reorganizing whole industries, retail, music, newspapers. And this is having an effect on our services, clearly in terms of allowing other services to emerge and in encouraging people to do things in different ways. Combined, these mean that we're thinking more about the impact locally of what libraries do, and libraries are being looked at from the point of view of impact in local environments. So resources, network, and impact are a framing of some of the questions that we need to look at. This means that choices become more interesting, maybe more difficult. Strategy is about making choices. It's about your theory of what it is gives you advantage, which choices you should make in terms of where to put your resource, where to put your effort for impact in this changing environment. And increasingly, it's difficult to do that because we don't really have a framework within which to think about some of these issues. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about frameworks in which we can begin to think about some of these choices that in turn affect local strategy, but also, especially in an environment like the UK, system-wide strategy where there are a variety of resources available to do things in a system-wide way as well as a local way, against the background of the changing network environment in terms of web-scale services like Google, HashiTrust, and so on. Very quickly, on that point, wanted to say that if you think about scale, libraries very much are institutional scale. They grew up in a pre-network environment, and the way they're organized is they assemble lots of material local to users. Their value was institutional, their services very much institutional, and the model of operation very much institutional. Over time, they developed sort of various group services. In the UK context, you had the British Library with Document Supply Centre. You have emerging JISC services, so a range of shared services facilitated by the network. So institutional and group, very characteristic of the way libraries operate within consortia, within national contexts. What we've seen over the last few years is the scale advantage that the network gives in terms of aggregation. So the web is a wonderful decentralized publishing environment. It makes publishing very easy. It's not very good for access though, so what's emerged is Google as a big central web scale service that gives you access to the web. And we can see this dynamic working in a variety of areas where we have large network services that emerge that give access to decentralized resources. So we have this diffusion, this decentralization working very much in tandem with a move to centralization, to scale advantage, to large network hubs that are so characteristic of what we do, Wikipedia, Expedia, Google. Now, the personal and the web scale are very closely combined because what you have is web scale services tend to be oriented towards the personal. If I use Mendeley, if I use Amazon, if I use any of these large network services, they will tend to know about me. They want to be able to keep me happy. They want over time to get to know all about my interests so that they can deliver to me what they think I want to know. Netflix will tell me what it thinks I will score a movie. It won't say, here's what other people scored. Well, it will, but it will also say, we think you will give this 4 stars. It wants to know me well enough to be able to tell me how I will score a film. So the personal and the web scale go very much hand in hand. And this is a big issue now for institutional scale services because those network services are reaching into individual workflows. But also it's difficult for the institutional or group services to develop personal services because they don't aggregate usage data, they don't necessarily have the scale that can generate those types of things. So we're working in this network world where people are moving between these scales in various ways. If you think about citation management, reference management, RefWorks, EndNote, sort of institutional level services, Mendeley, Zotero, personal and web scale. So lots of areas moving between these scales. The library, institutional scale, goodness in an institutional scale service means you aggregate lots of materials close to libraries. So good meant having a big collection. And libraries tended to be vertically organized around those collections. The space was there to house the collections and to let people interact with them. Systems manage the collections. Services and expertise were very much geared around interpreting, organizing, managing, exposing the collections. In a network environment, that's really changing quite a lot because all of these dimensions are changing and are potentially reorganized in that environment. So what we're seeing is a sort of disintegration between these types of things and a reassortment. They're getting unbundled and rebundled in a new environment. So as that happens, what does it mean for that library bundle, for thinking about what it is that the library does? Well, what is a library? An academic library is an investment that a university makes in shared information management. It's a way of making information management within the institution efficient. It used to be you put lots of things near to users, you organize them, give them space to interact. As we move into this network environment, what does it mean to be efficient in information management? What type of provision should the institution make in that type of thing? And this is leading to questions about what should be done inside, what should be outside, what should still be our focus. Are things that we're doing no longer quite so relevant in this new environment? Are there new things that we should be doing that we're not looking at? Now, this is a question that lots of people are facing. And one of the things we've used quite a bit in thinking about this is an article from 10 years ago or so by John Hagel and Mark Singer. And they talk about general firms that as interaction costs, the costs of transacting for services elsewhere, the cost of outsourcing, if you like, as they go down because the network makes it easier, then people begin to specialize a little bit more. So if you think about newspapers really printing, the manufacture, the operation, the plant, they've tended to push that out. They've quite often pushed out the actual news gathering, some of the infrastructure of that to wire services, and they focus really on advertising, community, creating an audience. All our Apple, as we know, really focused on innovation, on design. Actual manufacture may be done by somebody else. So increasingly, companies are focusing on what it is that makes them distinctive, and other people maybe do other things. But how do they make those types of choices? So Hagel and Singer suggest that there are really three types of things that organizations generally do. And what we've done here is interpreted those in a library environment. What they do is customer relationship management or engagement. They do innovation, and they do infrastructure. These three things require different ways of operating, different dynamics. They have different incentives. Engagement, customer relationship management, you really want economies of scope. You want to be able to do lots of things for people. You want to be able to do them quickly. Infrastructure, you need economies of scale. You want to spread the where things are done routinely across many people. You want to consolidate that, reduce the cost, tend to be robust, mature. You don't want things to change quickly because then lots of people have to change what they do. Innovation, clearly you have to be agile, move quickly, do various things. What Hagel and Singer say is that increasingly it's quite difficult for organizations to do all of these well all the time, that it makes sense to try maybe and specialize in one or two of these areas. So if you think about libraries spend a lot of time on infrastructure. They manage buildings, they manage collections, they manage systems. And to some extent, what we're seeing increasingly over the last couple of years is a feeling or a discussion that is too much effort going into this infrastructure, which is quite similar here and here and here and here. And is this at the expense of innovation or engagement? Or to put it another way, should more of the spend that's going on infrastructure, which is replicated in many institutions, be going on engagement, which may take a different form institution by institution? So if you think about the catalogue or a discovery system or an ILS, what you have is a lot of time and attention going into creating something locally, which really is very similar to what's available 20 miles down the street or 100 miles away. You have people working on repository here, repository here, repository here, metadata application profile here, here, here. You have people building discovery system here, here, here. What are the essential differences between these environments? Maybe not so much, and how much sense does this make? So if you think about engagement, this is attracting, building relationships with researchers and learners, very service-oriented. Customization is probably important. So should we be spending more time creating distinctive value around engagement? Infrastructure, back office capacities, support day-to-day operations. There you have systems, collections, buildings. Innovation, develop new services and have them accepted, change as requirements change. So the question that increasingly people are asking is, which of these areas are we in? Where should we be putting our focus? What should we be doing to create impact in this network environment where our resources are under pressure? So from a library point of view, what is distinctive? Where should libraries be specializing? And where should they be maybe trying to do other things in a collaborative way or externalizing them to other parties? So if you think about what libraries do, think about space, systems, collections, and services and expertise. This is a way of thinking about the collection of activities that a library has, from which it creates its impact and value. Space, collections, systems, and then services and expertise. What are we seeing happening? Increasingly, if you think about sharing infrastructure, externalizing infrastructure, trying to find economies of scale, well, they seem to apply to collections and to systems. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. If you think about relationship management, engagement, distinctive local value, there we can see people really thinking about space, about their buildings differently, thinking about the nature, the composition, the type of engagement that is appropriate in terms of services that they offer, mobilizing the people and expertise that they have, and then there may be new systems requirements. So if you think about space, collections, systems, services, and expertise, really I think a lot of the discussion we've seen in libraries over the last while maybe is thinking about space and collections, collections and systems, how do we think about reducing the local cost of those, reducing the amount of time and effort that is spent here and here and here dealing with those, so that can begin to think more about services, more about people, more about engagement here, here, and here in distinctive ways in relation to those particular constituencies. Now, if a library does begin to focus on particular areas and move other things away, well, there are a variety of ways in which some externalization can take place. Collaborative, consortial approach, commercial, you can buy a service from somebody, and clearly a lot of discussion about moving things to the cloud. So the balance of the time I'm going to talk about these sets of issues. An example, just to bring some of that together, this is the Stephen S. Clark Library at the University of Michigan, which has just opened. And what it does is it brings together collections, government information, expertise, staff, and data services. So it brings together a variety of previously distinct operations into this space that provides services in relation to information, data services, GIS, a range of data-related services. So they've been brought together in a new building, and it's interesting looking at the way that this is described. So there's a focus on bringing together collections, expertise, and new types of services in a new building, which allows collaboration between the staff and faculty and students. So the building, rather than housing lots of collections necessarily, is built to try and encourage collaboration as well as bringing together these activities. So the actual new library building contains 60-foot-long counter, so that you can actually look at large format maps, a presentation space, display cases and screens that showcase items from the print and digital collections, large format high resolution scanner, study spaces, support for study and interaction. So what we're seeing here is a combination of a new set of services, a set of specialist equipment, the ability to showcase collections and expertise, and the ability to bring together faculty, students, and library staff in a space that can be flexibly reconfigured for study or for interaction. So I think it's quite a nice example that brings together a whole collection of things in an interesting way. Okay, so looking at each of these quickly in turn. Space, as I just said, what we're seeing is space being reconfigured around the user experience rather than around collections, effectively moving from infrastructure to engagement. Space is being repurposed to create greater engagement, reconfigured around the user experience rather than around collections. And this means supporting social interaction for ad hoc rendezvous meeting place, and then as I just discussed, as a showcase for specialist equipment, for exhibitions, a place where you can potentially encounter specialist staff, specialist services, and we're beginning to see sharing of space with other campus entities, Writing Centre, Digital Humanities Centre. So very much moving what was infrastructure for managing collections into a space for greater engagement, for display of new and specialist services and expertise. So very much a reconfiguration of space. If you think about services, I quite like this phrase, the service turn, from Scott Walter at University of Illinois. University of Minnesota, statement on the ARL website, we're shifting from a collection-centric focus to one that is engagement-based. Engagement-based through the provision of a variety of new services. Scott Walter, describing the service turn, says, what has characterized libraries in the past, what has been distinctive? What's been distinctive is the nature of their collections, and that's because in that print-based environment, as I said, what characterized you was the size of your collection, how big it was, how close it was to your users. Now, increasingly, what defines the library is the nature and quality of its services, how it reaches out into the learning or the research experience, what quality of service it offers to its users. So collections are still important, but increasingly excellence will be demonstrated in the types of services that engage with users. And Scott Walter has an article here. He has a range of examples. Some of those, plus a couple of others. Bowling Green State University strives to make meaningful connections with incoming students early in their academic career, to partner with them then over time. University of Michigan has an M publishing unit, brings together the University of Michigan Press, the Scholarly Publishing Office, the Institutional Repository, the Copyright Office, and the Text Creation Partnership. So a whole set of activities here that relate to the university, the institution's scholarly communication mission, relate to the way in which it manages and discloses scholarly outputs from the institution, brought together in a new service which makes connections between them and is able then to offer a distinctive, integrated set of services to the users. Emory University, looking at personal collections, digital personal collections. So it has, for example, the Salman Rushdie archive. The personal digital papers of Salman Rushdie are being collected, curated, organized by Emory. Salman Rushdie recently reported in the news now, if he wants to look something up from his past, he doesn't go to his own collection somewhere, he goes to Emory because they have organized these for him. So from Emory's point of view, interest in British and Irish authors, interested in collecting those, moving now into the next stage, saying, well, what does it mean to have a Salman Rushdie collection in a network world where Rushdie does his work on a PC, where we have these digital papers, and then what does it mean to make that available? And we have initiatives like Scholarly Commons, research centres, places where faculty, researchers, students can come together with resources, with each other, with staff, and a number of examples like that, Scholarly Commons at University of Illinois. So pushing into new service areas. Bound up with services is expertise. In order to provide value within the institution, the types of expertise that is available is also becoming more varied because it needs to interact with these new services, but also there are new demands on the library. Coupled with that is, I think, a general trend towards trying to make that expertise more visible. on the simple grounds that if the library wishes to be seen as expert, then its expertise needs to be visible. So here what we have are things like making sure that people can find librarians, that they can find specialist expertise, they can find the person that will be able to help them with their questions. So people are entry points, not just systems and services. Quite interesting again, Michigan returns appropriate subject librarians in a search that you do on its top level website. It returns stuff from the catalog, from abstracting and indexing services, but it also returns library staff. As the library engages more with research and learning practice around the campus, looking at new skills, pedagogical, copyright, web design, a variety of skills that are required to actually develop, create value within the research and learning workflows. And also then a focus maybe on marketing and assessment, which wasn't as strong in the past but becoming more important. And also really thinking strongly about how to partner effectively, how to reach out, how to advocate effectively and develop new partnerships. Systems, I don't say very much about this because I understand that in the context of this meeting a lot of thought has been given to this, and you are thinking about a variety of scenarios. I would point again to engagement, thinking as we think about systems, thinking about a focus on engagement in terms of things like resource guides, integration with learning management, getting into the workflow, but also beginning to think about aggregating usage data so that you can do recommendation, you can develop those types of personal experiences that we're so accustomed to in the network services. Clearly a move to the cloud for infrastructure. Move to the cloud covers a lot of complexity, and there are different ways in which that will happen, but certainly a move to sharing the cost of infrastructure, and also beginning maybe to exploit some of the cooperative possibilities that emerge when people are using shared systems and infrastructure in the cloud. And that points to also the emergence of much deeper collaboration between institutions as they recognize the benefits of providing some of these infrastructure and other services in a shared way. In a US context, interesting, the Orbis Cascade Alliance, which is a group of libraries in Oregon and Washington, universities, most of the universities in Washington and Oregon. And Too Cool, the deep collaboration between Columbia and Cornell. Each of those initiatives has recently issued an RFI, request for information, for a shared LMS, library management system, ILS, and sort of beginning to think about how do we share the cost of infrastructure so that we can focus more on engagement and creating local value. Collections changing, I think, quite quickly. Like to make a distinction between outside-in collections and then inside-out. Outside-in are the things that libraries buy and license, so books, journals, DVDs. There, what we can see is increased consolidation from an industry point of view, in discovery systems, in aggregators, in publishers. Move from print to licensed, happening quite quickly, quite variably across institutions maybe, but inexorably. Growing interest in managing down print. This goes hand in hand with the need to reconfigure space. So a lot of interest now in how to systematically begin to manage down print collections, while at the same time within the system being able to assure users access to appropriate materials when possible, and a move to user-driven models, patron-driven acquisition notably. Here, when you think about discovery, the aim, the library wants to allow people to discover what's available. So the library will typically buy a range of stuff, license a range of stuff, offer a range of discovery options, and then maybe buy or license something. But it's the library aim is to say, here's a range of things that you can look in to find what you might be interested in out there. Inside out is becoming very important the last few years in this digital network environment. Here what you have is special collections, research and learning materials, and these tend to be expertise databases, faculty researcher profiles. These are things that are created within the institution from digitized special collections as outputs of research and learning. And here, increasingly universities, institutions want to expose these, to disclose these to the world, to make them available to other people as part of the presence on the web of those institutions. And over time, this sort of plays with reputation of the institution, how much you can see of the intellectual output, the special collections of an institution have an impact on perception of that. So here, increasingly, you want to have stuff discovered by other people. So the dynamic is somewhat different. You want to disclose this stuff to the world. You want it to show up in Google. You want it to show up in Wikipedia. You want it to be harvested. You want it to show up in Google Scholar. So the inside-out, outside-in distinction, quite important. Outside in is where we've historically put most of our effort. Inside out becoming more important. So if you think about some of those areas, print collections, we see a lot of major initiatives. In the US, you've got Western Regional Storage Trust. You have Hattie Trust becoming interested in this area. A range of consortial and other initiatives. Obviously in the UK, you've got the UK Research Reserve. But over time, what we will see emerge is print collections consolidated in national or regional initiatives. So effectively, libraries externalizing print management into shared environments. Obviously something that won't happen tomorrow, but the direction seems established. If you think about discovery layers, people very familiar with a range of options, including WorldCat Local from OCLC. What we have here is a variety of organizations effectively creating data wells, large aggregations of abstracting and indexing material, combined maybe with local collections, combined with some digital collections. And these are now becoming the norm for discovery of library materials. And they're organized in a different way. Typically, they are central index hosted in the cloud, and the individual library has a view onto that. So in a sense, the discovery of collections from the library point of view is also moving out to other providers under the control, obviously, of the library. However, if you think about discovery more generally, at the same time, discovery has moved to the network level. People do search in Google Books, Google Scholar, Amazon, a variety of disciplinary resources, things like Archive, RePEc, SSRN. So a large amount of discovery happens at that network level. Interesting number from University of Minnesota that more than 75% of requests to their SFX instance originate externally with things like PubMed Central or Google Scholar. So discovery moving up to the network level. And to local or institutional curation environments, things like resource guides, reading lists, but also citation management, sort of research networky services. They're a combination of personal and network. EasyBib, very popular citation creation tool. So people using these environments and network resources, and to some extent the sort of institutional resource may be a little bit squeezed in the middle again. So from the point of view of discovery and collections, the disclosure of what I have to the network level is very important. It's very important for me to have my resolver configured so that Google Scholar will bring people into me. It's very important that I am represented in appropriate union catalogs that mean that Google Books will come into me. It's important to me that my special materials, my research materials, my learning materials are appropriately harvested, that I play well with Google from a harvesting point of view, that they are crawled or harvested by services that are important to those, that my theses and dissertations show up in the right places. So more focus on making sure that I disclose stuff to the network level so that other people can find it, but also importantly so that my users can find it. I want my users on Google Scholar to find my things in my library. And also I think more attention to institutional and personal curation environments, citation management, reading lists, resource guides, these types of things that sort of frame choices. There's an additional layer of selection of curation, but also there are places where people are finding things. So in addition to providing a discovery service, which brings together catalog and ANI services, increasingly we have these two interests which to some extent move library focus up and out to the personal, to the network. Okay, so I've spoken about the components, if you like, the types of things that comprise the library service and some of the ways in which those are changing. If you think about an individual library, if you think about group libraries, if you think about something like the JISC environment, what we can see is a variety of patterns of externalization. So looking at this table, things can be at different scales, and I've spoken about this: institutional, group, web scale. And then they can be sourced with different types of organization. They can be collaboratively sourced, groups of people can come together and do it themselves. Public sourcing is quite important in a variety of contexts. Maybe under some pressure, but still central. And then you have third party, whether it's a not-for-profit or a vendor or some other third party. So looking at the table, you can see a variety of ways in which libraries are securing services, or ways in which you can think about externalizing services in this new environment. So Tripod is a group collaboration. It's effectively a shared systems environment between 3 liberal arts colleges in Philadelphia. DSpace or Viewfind is a sort of collaborative activity. It's open source, lots of people contribute, but it's delivered in an institutional context. It scales to an institutional context. PubMed Central, publicly provided, but it scales to the level of the web as a whole. Public group, quite interesting in the context of this meeting. Something like OhioLink has a strong collaborative element, but it's also supported by the Ohio Board of Regents. It's centrally managed as part of the sort of education research infrastructure in Ohio. In a UK context, a lot of activity supported by JISC and others to provide that sort of group service in a public way. Public institutional would be maybe something like the activities of JISC collections, where the value is delivered institutionally or locally, but the activity is publicly supported. So I think this gives a useful way of thinking about ways in which you begin to source and scale activities. That groups of institutions may come together to do things. They may be publicly supported. They may go to third parties. but also the level at which something happens is quite important. Do I do this myself? Is it really something that should be done in a bigger group? Is it really something that should be done on a national or a broader scale? Or is it something that I should leave? I mean, should I manage my images very carefully locally, but then really think about how I use a variety of network resources, Flickr and others, to make sure that they're exposed in the world? So we're going to end up doing a variety of these things and having to make choices about them. So to conclude, in terms of directions, we have a big move to strengthening engagement. Thinking about system support for engagement, curation environments, recommendation, thinking about relationships, marketing and assessment, and the service turn, thinking about services, how the library reaches out into workflows, how it develops services that are of value in the research and learning process. So engagement becoming much more important to create distinctive local value. Engagement can be personal, around spaces, but also increasingly systems-oriented, systems-mediated. If you think about our relationship with network services, very much driven by data. So data-driven engagement actually quite important in a library context, alongside new services and other ways of doing things. Increasingly externalizing infrastructure into shared environments or to third-party environments, which means making decisions about what should be done, what maybe should be given up. Deeper collaboration, which means thinking about trust, but also then agreements, long-term relationships, and a move really from a sort of just-in-case view to a just-in-time, thinking about how to provide that service or infrastructure when it's needed. I haven't said very much about innovation, but it seems to me that one of the important aspects of innovation in this new environment is thinking about the new skills that will be required to deliver some of these services, but also organizational innovation, thinking about how institutions are going to work together or work with public institutions or third parties to actually deliver some of these new ways of working. TooCool, an example of that, where Columbia and Cornell have made a long-term deep commitment to some really deep sharing of resource across those two institutions. So organizational innovation quite important in this new environment. So in terms of thinking about strategic choices, really thinking about how do I move resource from infrastructure to engagement to new service. In terms of thinking about infrastructure, how do I engage with other institutions, and how do I engage with the mechanisms that are available to move shared infrastructure, public infrastructure, which is to some extent what you are doing today. So, thank you very much.